Hello, one and all. Back again, Vedic Vision. Here's someone absolutely new on our channel, Sir Michael Reeds.
Oh,
Michael Reeds, sir, welcome.
thank you
Uh,
for inviting me on.
Sir, I don't think so. He needs any introduction. He is into astrology from many years. Uh, I got introduced to him and the various other teachers through the Saptarishis channels and personally to Sunil sir. Since then, I have been following all of them. Sir is into teaching. He has beautiful courses on his uh, channel. It's called Pulse of the Universe and Vedic Astrology.com.
Vedic
He
Astrology Academy.com.
astrologyacademy.com. I'll
Thank you.
give the links below in my
Okay.
description box. And then Sir is teaching nakshatras in a beautiful way. So today's session we have is on nakshatras. Basically, a simple way of deciphering and using nakshatras, how to decipher a chart. The floor
Thank
is all
you.
yours, sir.
Okay. Thank you for having me on. Well, the thing that I find with nakshatras is nakshatras are very confusing for people to grab onto because nakshatras are less analytical and they're more subjective. I always like using the word they're amorphous. So when you try to figure out how they're going to behave, it's really difficult to do. And I find quite often when people are learning astrology, they get really confused when it comes down to nakshatras because you can have qualities like a nakshatra can be simultaneously active and feminine. And
Correct.
when your mind tries to decipher what that means, it becomes really complex. And so if you're going in and you're trying to learn 27 different nakshatras, and people in the West, they're not as familiar with nakshatras. It's a completely different concept for them. And so it often becomes very confusing. So what I have found is it's really advantageous to get people to focus on the deity that's connected to the nakshatra, which for some people I also recognize is a bit of a learning curve, and some of the symbolism around that deity, what that deity is about from the stories connected to that deity, as well as the nature of the nakshatra and something called the kingdom of the nakshatra, which is something I find a lot of people aren't familiar with. But each nakshatra will come from one of three kingdoms, either the mineral kingdom, the plant kingdom, or the animal kingdom. And so I found a really good system to begin to get people to engage with the nakshatras that relates to just combining those three things. Because when you're first learning, if you'll learn those first three things first, it'll begin to make a little more sense to you. And then you can go in and add some of the other subtleties. Nakshatras don't behave the way that we want them to. They're very symbolic. It's hard to figure out what's causing what with the nakshatras. I've generally found for people who might have an interest in working with nakshatras that one of the ways you can work with them is by learning all the various qualities connected to the nakshatras, which takes a while to do. I'll acknowledge. But if you have a planet, let's say in one nakshatra, and it's forming an aspect to a planet in another nakshatra, if you look at what those nakshatras share in common through that confluence, you'll have a clear understanding of what's actually going to happen with that. But I put together a PowerPoint presentation for us for today. I will let people know for those who are a little bit familiar with the deities that are connected to each of the nakshatras. I am taking the source of the deities from a text called Taittiriya Brahmana, which is part of the Krishna Yajurveda, and it's one of the oldest, if not the oldest text that actually has a description of each of the nakshatras. And so some of the deities will be different. So for instance, with Chitra, I know most people are familiar with connecting Chitra to Vishwakarman, but in Taittiriya Brahmana, it's connected to Indra, as is Shatabishak Nakshatra is also connected to Indra. And there's a key lesson there with that. And when we get to that, I'll touch briefly on that concept. But I thought I would take us into the document first. So let me just share that with everybody. There we go. So let's start with the nature of the nakshatras. Nakshatras, each nakshatra will fall into one of the different nature categories. So for instance, the first one that we have is Lagu and Kshipra. So Lagu meaning light and Kshipra meaning swift. And so a quality of these nakshatras is they like to do things quickly, right? They're swift moving nakshatras, as the name would apply, but they also like to alleviate burdens, right? That's a key focus of them. And if you think about that, that fits in with the light category of it. So looking to lighten the load, so to speak. And 3 nakshatras belong to this particular category, and those are Ashwini, Pusha, and Hasta. And then for the next one, I imagine we're covering the text over, so I'm going to like scroll down a little bit there. There we go. The next category is the Ugra and Krura category. Krura means cruel. Interestingly enough, just touching on this briefly, quite often when people are learning the planets, they want to call the planets benefics and malefics, but the real word for the malefic planets are cruel. They're called Krura. And the Krura planets, they're not necessarily bad. They just handle things in a harsh manner. So Krura means cruel, or harsh is another way to understand it. Ugra means intense or passionate. Occasionally, you'll find if somebody has a predominance of these planets in their horoscope, they can tend towards violence, but it doesn't always mean that the person's going to be a violent person if they have planets in that category. So Ugra and Krura, intense, violent, and cruel. So these nakshatras can be passionate in their action. When there's opposition to their path, they're going to do whatever it takes to get that opposition out of the way. Think of it in terms of if you're having surgery, so to speak, right? The act of cutting, like, let's say, a tumor off of your arm is violent because you're taking a sharp instrument and you're actually cutting the skin. But sometimes it's that intense action or that seemingly violent action that's necessary in order to cleanse something out of our lives or to get rid of something. With the Ugra and Krura nakshatras, quite often, things that they do hurt others. It's not always intentional. So for instance, one of the Ugra and Krura nakshatras is Bhurani. And Bhurani, one of the qualities of Bhurani is moving on or letting go. Oftentimes you'll find if there's a Bhurani element present at the in a relationship, then the person, if it's activated at the right time in association with other factors in the horoscope, like 7th and 12th house factors that can end a relationship, the person's going to be very firm in moving on from the relationship. Okay, so things that are done through the Ugra and Krura nakshatras can hurt other people. It's not always intentional, though. Sometimes it's completely unintentional. Sometimes, though, it is intentional. So the Ugra and Krura nakshatras are Bhurani, Magha, Purva Falguni, Purva Ashada, and Purva Bhadrapada Nakshatra. So once again, that's Bhurani, Magha, Purva Falguni, Purva Ashada, and Purva Bhadrapada Nakshatra. Interestingly enough, we think of Venus as being a very gentle, wonderful planet. All the Ugra and Krura nakshatras that I should say all the Venus nakshatras are also Ugra and Krura. So Bhurani is a Venus-oriented nakshatra, Purva Falguni as well, and also Purva Ashada nakshatra.
Correct.
So the next category for us are the Mridu, Tikshna, Mrisha, and Sadarana nakshatras. A good way I like to explain the concept of Tikshna. Tikshna means sharp. I've often found with Tikshna nakshatras, whether it's a Mridu Tikshna or just a plain Tikshna nakshatra, that things always feel like they're on edge. Mridu means delicate. So Mridu Tikshna means delicately sharp. Mrisha means mixed.
Yes.
Okay. And Sadharana, a good interpretation of it is general. It's a little more in depth than that. So what you find with the Mridu, Tikshna, Mrisha, and Sadharana nakshatras is that the balance is delicate. And there's a process of purification and distillation that's going on, right? Those two nakshatras are Kritika, which is very big on purifying, Vishaka as well. People don't think of Vishaka in relation to that, but there's a process that's going on with Vishaka Nakshatra where, because it's connected to Indra and Agni together, which we'll get to in a little bit, where the individual is shifting into a new phase in their life, but they still have some business connected with the old phase. So there's a purification process and a eliminating process of getting rid of all the final things that are necessary before shifting on to the next phase. And quite often with planets in Vishaka Nakshatra, the individual finds themselves on two simultaneous paths, and they have to kind of purify out of their lives which one of those paths that they need to move on from. So Dhruva and Sthira. Dhruva means fixed and Sthira means firm. So the Dhruva and Sthira nakshatras are very determined in their nature. And those nakshatras are Rohini, Uttara Falguni,
All
Uttara
the
Ashada,
Uttaras.
yeah, and Uttara Bhadrapada Nakshatra. Yes, all the Uttaras are the Dhruva and Sthira nakshatras. And Uttara means ladder, right? So it's like the process of being determined so that you can get through to the final stage. And I think you might have been hinting earlier that all the Ugra and Krura nakshatras are also Purva nakshatras. So Mridu and Maitrim. Mridu meaning delicate, as we were discussing earlier, and gentle, and Maitrim meaning friendly or agreeable. Okay, so a common trait with the Mridu and Maitrim nakshatras is they try or they need to try to be agreeable with situations and people in their lives. So let's say, for instance, if you we were talking about a relationship ending. Let's say that you had one of the planets that's triggering that in a Mridu Maitrim Nakshatra. You might try to handle the divorce proceedings, in a nice and gentle manner with the person. Or if you're the party who is being divorced from, you may need to learn how to accept that that's something that's going to come into being. So it's not always about befriending a person. Sometimes it's about befriending a situation and accepting something. So the Mridu and Maitrim nakshatras are Mrigashiro, Chitra, Anuradha, and Revati nakshatras. Then we have the Tikshna and Dharuna nakshatras. Tikshna meaning sharp, as we were saying earlier, and Dharuna meaning hard or harsh. So these nakshatras, they always have this feeling as if a person's dealing with a situation where they're walking a razor's edge in regards to that situation. And because of a situation being not quite as delicate as the Mridu Tikshna, but because of things being on edge, there's knowledge that things could go either way. And so the individual finds themselves in a position of needing to be firm in regards to situations they see could go either way in order to try to make it go in the manner that seems most appropriate to them. So the Tikshna and Dharuna nakshatras are Ardra, Ashlesha, Jeshta, and Mula. Okay, Ardra, Ashlesha, Jeshta, and Mula. Okay. So that handles all of the nature of the nakshatras. And if you kind of go and find the portion of your video where this is at, you can write down a little list of these. You can put Lagu and Kshipra are Ashwini, Pusha, and Hasta. The Ugra and Krura are Bhurani, Maga, Purva Falguni, Purva, Ashada, and Purva Bhadrapada. The Mridu, Tikshna, Mrisha, and Sadharana Nakshatras are Kritika and Vishaka. The Dhruva and Sthira are Rohini, Uttara Falguni, Uttara Ashada, and Uttara Bhadrapada. And the Mridu Maitrim Nakshatras are Mrigashiro, Chitra, Anuradha, and Revati. And the Tikshna Dharuna Nakshatras are Ardra, Ashlesha, Jeshta, and Mula. So we're going to go on next to talk about the kingdom of the nakshatras. So each nakshatra will belong to one of three kingdoms. Okay, those are the mineral kingdom, which is the Dhatu kingdom, the plant kingdom, which is the Mula kingdom, which is very easy to get confused with the concept of Mula Nakshatra when you're going through and looking at this. But Mula means plant, and Mula Nakshatra itself relates to, roots tied together, right? So Mula is a plant. Then we have the animal nakshatras, which are the Jiva nakshatras. And each of these kingdoms has a lesson that's connected to it for the person who has a planet in that nakshatra. So the lesson of the mineral kingdom is about being strong enough to be self-supportive, okay? Being strong within yourself and being able to be self-supportive, and also being in a position to be a support for others due to being self-supportive yourself. But when the Dhatu Nakshatras, when the mineral nakshatras are weak, there can be a tendency to feel as if no one is supporting that person in that area of life. They feel like the support that they need isn't there. Okay? So that's the lesson of the mineral nakshatras. When strong and steady, when strong, it's steady and self-supportive. They can also be a support for others due to their strength. But when they're weak, there can be the tendency to feel as if no one is supporting them. So the Dhatu Nakshatras are Ashwini, Rohini, Punarvasu, Magha, Hasta, Vishaka, Mula, Shravana, and Purva Bhadrapada. And a good way to do this, if you know the order of the nakshatras, is you just start with the first nakshatra. Every third one will be a mineral nakshatra. So Ashwini, Bhurani, Kritika, Rohini, and you can see how that goes. So the mineral nakshatras are Ashwini, Rohini, Punarvasu, Magha, Hasta, Vishaka, Mula, Shravana, and Purva Bhadrapada. Then you have the plant nakshatras. I often like using an analogy to explain the plant nakshatras that you kind of have to use your imagination a little bit for. So we're going to pretend that this isn't a pen. We're going to say that this is a flower that's growing outside. And for some strange reason, you have a lamp outside, okay? Don't ask how you got the power cable out there. But the flower is just going to naturally grow towards the sunlight. But then if you have that sun go behind a cloud, that flower will begin to rectify course and grow towards the stronger source of light. Then the sun will come back out again and it'll adjust and start very slowly growing towards the sun again. So plant nakshatras are very adaptable, and that's a good quality as well. They adapt where they're going to find the most nourishment. They'll just naturally seek out more sun, extend their roots to where they can find more nutrients and water from the soil, but they can also have a tendency to be too adaptable. For instance, an individual may feel that they're not being nourished by their environment, and so they adapt, and then they get into another situation, and very shortly afterwards, they feel that they're not being nourished again, and they'll adapt again. But occasionally, if they would have stayed in just one environment and let their roots go down deeply enough, they would have found the nourishment that they needed. So plant nakshatras are sometimes needing to learn how to let their roots go in rather than adapting all the time. it's like a mixture of knowing when to be flexible and to bend with things and to adapt, and when to be, just firm and dig your roots in and let yourself strengthen your position where you're at. But don't get that confused with the mineral nakshatras. There's a lot of differences that are there. So the animal kingdom, the lesson of the animal kingdom is the law of the jungle. I always like to tell people, which it's eat or be eaten, dominate or submit, lead or follow. So animal nakshatras are learning lessons about assertiveness, when to be assertive and when to be more passive, when to lead and when to follow, when to take charge and delegate, and when to submit to a higher authority. That's when they're balanced. When they're balanced, they just know when to be strong, and they know when to delegate, and they know when to, somebody is, stronger than them or wiser than them, and they'll just naturally submit to the person who's higher in authority at that time. But when they're imbalanced, there's often a need for greater assertion and to prove one's strength against the rest of the pack or the herd, at least until someone else proves that they're stronger than that person is. Or they can also have a tendency to submit to others who are not worthy of being followed. And I think we skipped over the plant nakshatra, so I'm going to go back and read over these here in just a moment. But touching on the animal nakshatras, that's Kritika, Ardra, Ashlesha, Uttada Falguni, Swati, Jeshta, Uttada Ashada, yeah,
Shatavisha Revati.
Exactly. So the mula or the plant nakshatras are Bhurani, Mrigashiro, Pusha, Purva Falguni, Chitra, Anuradha, Purva Ashada, Dhanishta, and Uttada Bhadrapada. All right, so we'll go over all of those once again. So mineral nakshatras are Ashwini, Rohini, Punarvasu, Magha, Hasta, Vishaka, Mula, Shravana, and Purva Bhadrapada. The plant nakshatras are Bhurani, Mrigashira, Pusha, Purva Falguni, Chitra, Anuradha, Purva Ashada, Dhanishta, and Uttada Bhadrapada. And animal nakshatras are Kritika, Ardra, Ashlesha, Uttada Falguni, Swati, Jeshta, Uttada Ashada, Shatabhishak, and Revati nakshatras. Now, in the next few slides, I've put together all the different concepts. I've put together the kingdom of the nakshatra and the nature of the nakshatra and the deity. So we have all of that combined. So I'm not going to go into each of the deities in great length explaining each of the circumstances, because I don't think we'd have time to do 27 of those. But, just to give a general idea of this, when you learn these concepts, it's just putting the deity that's connected to the nakshatra together with the nature of the nakshatra and the kingdom of the nakshatra. Okay, so we'll go through each of these briefly with each of the deities and maybe touch on a few just to give you an example with it. So Ashwini Nakshatra is connected to the Ashwin Kumars, and it's Lagu and Kshipra, or light and swift, and it's a mineral nakshatra. Bharani is connected to Yama, and it's Ugra and Krura, and it's also a plant nakshatra or a mula nakshatra. Kritika is connected to Agni, the fire deity, and it's a Mridu, Tikshna, Mrisha, and Sadarana nakshatra, and of the animal kingdom or Jiva kingdom. Rohini is connected to Prajapati, which is a name of Brahma. Dhruva and Sthira, so it's fixed and firm, and it's a mineral nakshatra. Mrigashira is connected to Soma, which is a name of the moon. It's Mridu and Maitrim, and it's also a plant nakshatra. And there's a deeper connection between a plant nakshatra and Soma, which, if we have time, we'll go into that here in just a little bit. But let's just go through all of them first. Then we have Ardra Nakshatra, which is connected to Rudra. It's Tikshna and Daruna, and it's also an animal nakshatra. Punarvasu, which is connected to Aditi, which is a Chara and Chala nakshatra. I don't know if we went over the Chara and Chala nakshatras. Did that get somehow left off?
Yes, we don't have Chara in Chala.
Oh, I think I might have. I will explain it to everyone very briefly, and I actually have it written on a list. And what I will do is if you want to contact me, you can get a copy of this PowerPoint. I'm happy to give it to people. We might even be able to kind of fit another slide in here and do that for people because we've got plenty of time. Let's just do that. It's quick enough. I don't know how I could have overlooked that.
That's okay.
Maybe I reached the end of the page. Let's try that again. There we go. Okay. So Chara, Chala. Moving and unsteady. Okay, and the Chara and Chala nakshatras are Punarvasu. Let's describe what Chara and Chala nakshatras are. They are generally changing states, is a good way to understand these nakshatras. They're in a position of shifting between one phase and another. If you imagine the concept of thinking of a rock on a precipice, right at the very edge of a cliff or something, and it sits there for thousands of years, and all of a sudden, out of nowhere, it falls down and starts rolling downhill. That's a good quality of the Chara and Chala nakshatras. Think of the concept of kinetic energy. There's often a restless energy that are connected to these nakshatras, and they're going through this question in their lives of whether to move or to let things be set in motion, or whether they need to be still and wait for things. So think of changing states, restless, sometimes uneasy, and you'll have a good understanding of the Chara and Chala nakshatras. And those nakshatras are Punarvasu. We also have Swati. We have Shravana, Dhanishta, and Shatabisha. Okay, so let's go back to our PowerPoint here, which we're already on, but let's move on to our PowerPoint. Okay, so we were on to looking at, were we on Rudra?
Punarvasu.
We were on Punarvasu. I didn't know if we went all the way into Ardra Nakshatra or not. So Punarvasu Nakshatra is connected to Aditi, and it's a Chara and a Chala Nakshatra, and it's of the mineral kingdom. Pusha is connected to Brihaspati, the priest of the gods, and it's also a name of Jupiter, and it's Lagu and Chitra, and it's Mula of the plant kingdom. Ashlesha is connected to the serpent deities, the Sarpa, and it's Tikshna and Daruna, and it's from the animal kingdom. Maga is connected to the ancestors, the Pitris, also called the Patara, and it's Ugra and Krura, and it's of the mineral kingdom. Purva Falguni. Now, with Purva Falguni and Uttara Falguni, you'll find a lot of sources will say and Uttara Falguni is connected to Aryaman. And sometimes you'll see it being interchanged with each other. And when you get to the Purvas and the Uttaras, really they're one nakshatra kind of split in half on a certain level. So the energies are somewhat similar in that particular capacity, especially with the Falgunis. So Purva Falguni is connected to Aryaman. It's a Ugra and Krura nakshatra, or a violent and cruel nakshatra, and it's of the plant kingdom. Then you have Uttara Falguni, which is connected to Bhaga, which is Dhruva and Sthira, or fixed and firm, and it's connected to the animal kingdom. Hasta, which is connected to Savitar, which is the life-giving aspect of the sun, which is light and swift, and it's of the mineral kingdom. Chitra and Jeshta and Shatabisha are all three, in terms of Taittiriya Brahmana, connected to Indra. And Indra is referred to as the conqueror. And Indra was given his status as the king of the gods through conquering his senses. So with Chitra, Jeshta, and Shatabisha, there's always the concept of right perception. Okay, quite often with Chitra Nakshatra, an individual will become allured in a certain direction, thinking that, oh, this must be the right path for me. And they'll go down that path only to find out, no, this isn't the right path, right? And that happens over and over again with Chitra Nakshatra. But that process helps them to learn what the right path is, or what the truth is for them. And so that's how the quality of Indra comes into play with that. So Chitra Nakshatra is a gentle and friendly, or delicate and friendly nakshatra, and it's of the plant kingdom. Swati is connected to Vayu, the deity of the wind, and it's a moving and unsteady, or Chara and Chala nakshatra, and it's of the animal kingdom. Vishaka is connected to Indragni, which is Indra and Agni put together. So if you think of it this way, Indra being about conquering the senses and right perception, Agna being about purification, or purifying those things from one's life that, that aren't right and that don't give the right perception, and then adjusting one's life path based upon that. So Vishaka is a Mridu Tikshna, Mrisha, and Siddharana nakshatra, and it's of the mineral kingdom. Anuradha is connected to Mitra. Quite often you'll hear about it being connected to Radha as well. There are some very different concepts about each of those associations, both which fit in overall with the meaning of Anuradha Nakshatra. And it's a Mridu and Maitrim and a plant nakshatra. Jeshta is also connected to Indra, and it's a Tikshna Daruna and a Jiva nakshatra. Mula nakshatra, not to be confused with Mula kingdom, is Niriti, which is the goddess of dissolution and destruction. And it's a Tikshna Daruna and a Dhatu Nakshatra. Purva Ashada is connected to Apa, the water deity. It's a cruel and violent and a plant nakshatra. Uttara Ashada is connected to the Vishvadevas, and it's a fixed and firm and an animal nakshatra. Shravana is connected to Vishnu, and it's a moving and unsteady nakshatra connected to the mineral kingdom. Dhanishta is connected to the Vasus, which are the supporting deities and the deities of light and abundance. It's a moving and unsteady nakshatra and connected to the plant kingdom. Shatabisha is connected, of course, to Indra, as we were saying earlier. It's a moving and unsteady nakshatra, and it's an animal nakshatra. Purva Bhadrapada nakshatra is connected to Aja Ekapada, which is a one-footed goat form of Shiva, and it's Ugra and Krura and of the mineral kingdom. Uttara Bhadrapada Nakshatra is connected to Ahira Budnyas, and it's a fixed and firm nakshatra and belongs to the plant kingdom. And Revati is connected to Pushan, and it's a Mridu and Maitrim nakshatra, and it's also of the animal kingdom. Okay, so we can go over a few of these and kind of try to give you an idea of how all of these three things come together. For those of you who are a little bit familiar with the nakshatras already, it might strike you as being somewhat odd to find out that Revati is an assertive nakshatra, right? But a good way to understand this is quite often you'll find that there can be a tendency from the we don't want to say negative or positive because it's really just everybody going through different life phases, isn't it? But there can be a tendency with Revati Nakshatra natives to be a little bit passive aggressive upon occasion, right? So because they're gentle and they're friendly and they're wanting to convince or persuade somebody of something, but they can be assertive in that capacity. They can be persistent and continue to try to convince or continue to try to persuade, because Pushan is connected to the nurturing aspect of the sun. Pushan is one of the adityas, or the 12 deities that are the sun deified. And Pushan connects to the nourishing aspect of the sun. So Revati people see a good way that a situation could be nourished or developed, and they'll gently try to persuade other people that this is the right way to do that. And that's a common quality of Revati natives. Let's see if we can pick out a few more of these just to give you a good idea or concept about all of these. Bhurani Nakshatra, let's talk about that for a little bit. Yama is quite often, I would say, in the West misunderstood as just being a deity that's connected to death. But that's only one function of Yama. Yama is also called Dharma Raja, or the king of Dharma. And Yama relates to the transmigration of souls. Moving souls from one phase of their existence onto another. So when a person dies, Yama will usher the soul to the ancestral realm. So the individual can reflect back on their life, the deeds that they've accomplished, the things that they've done, and give them the capacity to determine how they have behaved in association with that. And then if needed, give them a new form to come into creation so they can take another life, right? So Bhurani Nakshatra is a cruel and violent nakshatra. And, think of it this way, which is, we think of, like the wonder of creation and creative energy, but the soul is coming here because it's got a lot of work to do. And, just being plopped here on the planet again and kind of recognizing that you're here in an environment that you may not want to be in or want to cope with, and that can be rather intense, right? And so quite often there's a good element of pain or difficulty that's connected to Bhurani Nakshatra. And being a plant nakshatra, it's seeking for ways in which to feel nourished or equally to give nourishment. And if we're going back to that concept we were talking about earlier, with Bhurani Nakshatra and relationships, quite often if Bhurani Nakshatra is somehow involved in the ending of a relationship, if there's a good strong Venus, the individual will see themselves as ending the relationship because they think it's the best thing for both parties involved. And so it's a nourishing thing. They're going, I'm going to put an end to this and shift this on to something different. Even though it may be seemingly cruel for me to put an end to this, I'm going to do that because I think that's the way that it can be most nourishing for everybody who's involved in the situation. Let's talk about Mrigashira a little bit and talk about the concept of soma.
Sorry.
Sure, go ahead.
I'll just ask one question here. So, what
Yeah,
will be the difference if there is a cruder planet in Bhurani or a soft planet in Bhurani? Like,
it
when it,
depends. Yeah, it depends upon the well-being of that planet, like whether it's afflicted. It also depends upon the well-being of Venus and whether it's afflicted in the situation. Ideally, if you have a cruel planet and a good, strong Venus, the person's just going to be very firm, like, very dry in the situation and go, nope, this is what needs to happen, no doubt. And you're picking up on something there because the quality of the planet often blends with the quality of the nakshatra. So if you have a cruel planet in a cruel nakshatra, it's going to be even
more
like,
cruel.
exactly. It's going to be harsh in its tendency to do that, right? The gentle
So,
planets, they have a harder time in it. Go ahead.
moon gets exalted over here in Bhurani. I
Hmm.
No,
Yeah,
it
but if
gets
you, because if
no. It gets
that's
exalted
Kritika,
in Kritika. Sorry, sorry.
exactly. Yeah. It's
Saturn gets debilitated in Bhurani.
yeah, yeah.
So Saturn is again a cruder planet or a malefic planet,
Hmm.
and being in a Ugra or a cruder nakshatra. So how will that react?
Well, you'd have to consider Venus in the equation. Like if you had a debilitated Venus, there would be a lot of stuck energy and the person feeling, feeling restlessly stuck and wanting to shift something that they feel like they can't adapt to, but that they can't like find any movement with it, or even being resistant to moving on too is another way to understand it. Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's the thing that's very tricky with nakshatras is having to get the balance right between the planet that's in the nakshatra and the what I've come to call, rather than the dispositor of the nakshatra, I've come to call the emissary. Because at the end of the day, nakshatras don't really have dispositors. We like to think of them as having dispositors, but they don't, because the planets that are connected to each of the nakshatras are really connected to that nakshatra for the purpose of creating Vimshotri dasha. Different dasha systems, different nakshatra dasha systems work with different nakshatra associations with different planets. So there's not per se a dispositor of the nakshatra, but we've become accustomed to calling them that. But that being the case, the well-being of the planet that's connected to the nakshatra, for instance, Venus with Bhurani, does impact how that nakshatra plays itself out. And one of the ways I like to explain it to people, and why I've kind of come up with using the concept of emissary, is that in more ancient times, the king would send a messenger to another kingdom when there was a message that was there. And if that emissary was strong and he could ride long distances without getting exhausted, and he wasn't stupid, he would get to the other kingdom, transmit the message well, things would go well, there'd be peace and harmony between the two kingdoms. But if he was a dullard, got exhausted very easily, and just very confused in nature, when he arrived at the other kingdom, he'd get the message all jumbled up, and you'd have the two parties at war. So a good way to understand the planets like Venus connected to Bhurani and the sun connected to Kritika is to think of them as messengers or emissaries, and how those planets are disposited is going to impact how the message of that nakshatra gets transmitted for the individual. But that was a good question. And that's something I often like to get people thinking about, because the reason nakshatras are so confusing for people to figure out is, in terms of interpretation and interpreting how they're going to play out in the horoscope, is there's so many different qualities to uh, focus on, and they're very amorphous, and they're impacted by the planet that's in them. They're equally impacted by planets that are aspecting them. And so you've got all these different qualities playing out simultaneously that the budding astrologer is going to have a hard time sorting through. And when you're trying to learn like, over 10 different qualities connected to the nakshatras, and you're going through 27 of them, you've just got a confusing amount of information to try to digest. And that's why starting here is a really good place to start, with the deity, the nature of the nakshatra, and the kingdom, because it gives you a really simple way of putting some information together. Just touching on Rigashiro Nakshatra briefly, because I find quite often when people get into Mrigashira Nakshatra, they don't understand the full nature of that nakshatra, and they think of it as, just fulfillment. It's about fulfillment, and that's as deep as they go. Soma is also like the life-giving sap that's in plants, and so interestingly enough, I find the sutra from Taittiriya Brahmana connected to Mrigashira Nakshatra really helps you to understand it a lot more deeply, which it says the diminutive pervadings of Soma. So life-giving essence of creation is everywhere within creation, but it appears to be diminishing. The diminutive pervadings of Soma, right, are sorry, I have to find the exact sutra for us. Bear with me for a second. Sorry, I think I have it here. That's in this other PowerPoint. The older I get, the more my memory slips me. Here we go. Are diffusions from above and weaving from below. Yeah, so the diminutive pervadings of Soma are diffusions from above and weaving from below. And so there's a quality with this nakshatra quite often of making do with what you have, because you can either look at your life and go, all the things that I need that would give my life nourishment are beginning to diminish, and I don't have enough, right? And you can focus on that, and you're going to feel a lack of fulfillment, right? Or you can go, maybe I have enough and I'm just not putting it together in the right way. And then you can feel fulfilled. So it's much more than just, fulfillment or finding fulfillment. There's always a sense of lack initially with Mrigashira Nakshatra, the sense of lack, and how do I work with what I have? That's the Mridu Maitrim quality. How do I work with what I have in order to find the right level of nourishment with whatever that planet rules, right? So if the planet's a relationship situation, generally the individual finds themselves in relationships that come together, split apart, they come back to the table, try to work it out, and then it splits apart again, and they do that over and over again because they're trying to figure out ways to put all the threads together. Interestingly enough, Punarvasu Nakshatra and Mula Nakshatra are both connected together in terms of the text from Taittiriya Brahmana, because they focus on the deities that are connected to those nakshatras rather than saying of the deity, which is what it says for all the rest of the nakshatras. It says for the deity, right? And with Punarvasu Nakshatra, it's connected to Aditi, who's the mother of the Adityas. And those, as we were talking about earlier, are the 12 different deities of the sun. The sun relates to the Atman, or the soul. So really the Adityas are connected to the soul deified, or 12 different parts of it. And there's some symbolism there in terms of like the zodiac too, which is pretty interesting. So Aditi is the boundless mother god who gave birth to them and who nourishes them. So Aditi is about the coming together. And there's this restless, uneasy energy that's trying to condense and be firm and strong enough in order to achieve its actions. Now, interestingly enough, if we move forward, because we were focusing on Punarvasu and Mula for a reason. Punarvasu is about the coming together, and Mula Nakshatra is about the separation or the falling apart. And with Mula Nakshatra, there's this energy of things being on edge. I have to hold this together. It's me who's holding it together. until the person feels that they're not strong enough to hold it together anymore. And they recognize maybe the best thing for me to do is to just let this all fall apart. So there's so much you can make with nakshatras just based upon these three concepts. Did you have some questions or anything that you wanted to
Yeah,
focus
that
on?
no, it's pretty clear. Whatever you have said, people can go and try it out in their own charts or
Yeah,
whatever, and
definitely.
connect to what you have taught us today, just by
Yeah,
using these three, uh, you can say, qualities of each nakshatra. Because when we do nakshatras, we are looking into 20, 30 qualities of nakshatras.
exactly. I a colleague of mine who wrote the translation of these sutras from Taittiriya Brahmana. He put it really well with the nakshatras. He was saying, like, imagine you found someone who'd never like experienced electricity, right? And you have to give them an idea of how electricity works. You can't tell them because they have no context to put it in. So all
Correct.
you can really do is give them an experience. So what I often like to tell people, because one of the traps that I find that people fall into when they're learning nakshatras is they try to think the nakshatras. And you can't think the nakshatras, you have to feel the nakshatras because they're connected to the moon. So one of the best ways to do it is to focus on the moon's movement every day, and then like find out where the moon is each day and go and look at all the different qualities of that nakshatra. Do this for like a year and you'll have all the nakshatras. If you try to tune in to what the energy of that day is about, you'll begin to understand how they work. Yeah. And then it's just a matter in terms of interpretation of understanding the different qualities of the planets. Like you have some planets that are rajasic in nature. And when you're dealing with the nakshatra that's predominantly rajasic, of course, that rajasic energy is going to get accentuated, right? Planets belong to different kingdoms too. The kingdoms are the same. So you can have a Dhatu planet in a Dhatu Nakshatra, and that's going to accentuate that quality. So really try to integrate all the symbolism of the nakshatras and see how all that symbolism comes together. And it's those factors where you're finding confluence that are really going to like help you to give your interpretation with the nakshatra as well.
Right, right. Perfect. So, guys, go and check this out in your own charts. And thank you, sir.
Oh,
Welcome.
my pleasure. My
Hope to
pleasure.
see you soon again with
Yes,
something new and nice.
that would be wonderful. Thank you. And take care of yourself.
Yes,
Bye
yes.
now.
Thank you, sir.